Hi everyone. Today I'm going to show how I did this face cup. It is an acrylic skin using and I also incorporate what's called the swipe method. So let's go ahead and get started. This is white acrylic paint mixed half and half with Floetrol. This is the brand that I use. I get it at Walmart, and the Floetrol I get that at Lowe's, and it's just mixed half and half, just like you would do with epoxy. So the whole background of the cup is white. So I have these little 3-ounce cups from Walmart, and I'm going to be filling it up to the top because I want to make sure that we have enough paint. And I just tried to think, if I was doing a regular dirty pour, pouring in different colors, how far up the cup it would go. So I just filled the whole cup with white. This one was a little bit thicker than I wanted, so when you're mixing your Floetrol and your white acrylic paint together, if it's still a little too thick, you can add a little bit of water to it. I'm just using the parchment paper to keep paint off of my tabletop. This is a cooling rack from the Dollar Tree, and a cutting mat, a plastic cutting mat from the Dollar Tree. You want to make sure that you use the shiny side and not the dull side. These come in 2 in a pack for $1. So I'm laying the cutting board on top of the cooling rack because it just helps it, it makes it easier for me to be able to move it around. So just get your paint on the mat. You're going to pour it directly on the mat. And then spread it around as best as you can. The paint was thick, so I was able to get it normally I'm able to do a 30-ounce skinny with these skins, but the paint was so thick that I was having a hard time spreading it around, so this was big enough to do a 20-ounce skinny. So you want to just make sure that you can't see your mat through the paint. Because those would be thin spots in your paint, and then as you're pulling the paint off the mat, it could rip. So just make sure that you can't see any of the mat through the white paint. So I'm not sure what the correct name of this tool is. I call it a painter spatula, so I'm just using that to smooth out any areas. I'm using, I believe this one was called Orchid Flash, and it's a color shifting paint. And I'm just filling up the bottom of the cup. I don't need a lot. I'm not going to use very much. Just enough to fill up the bottom of my medicine cup. The next one I'm using is Royal Gold Metallic. Both of these are folkart brands, and they are both available at Walmart. The Orchid Flash in my area, it can be a little hard to find. I have to go to 2 or 3 different Walmarts to be able to find it, and I've not been able to find it at Hobby Lobby or Michael's. So if I can find it, I buy 2 or 3 bottles. It's one of my favorite colors. So I have the Walmart brand Great Value water bottles, and I'm filling the cap up with water and I'm splitting it between the two. I just need to thin it just a little bit. I apologize if you can hear my snoring dog in the background. So I'm not, acrylic paints is not something that I work with every day, and there might be some people out there cringing because of how I'm mixing up my paint, or what I'm mixing into it, but this is what I've learned just for the purpose of tumblers. And it works just fine for me. I don't have any issues with it, so this is parchment paper that I'm tearing up into strips. They don't have to be all the same size. So now I'm going to put my gold paint, I'm going to run it down the middle of my white paint. The cup that I showed you in the beginning, I tried to recreate that, but these are like hydro dips. You never know what you're going to get. No 2 cups are going to look the same. So although I was a little disappointed with not being able to get it to look almost the same, this one didn't turn out too bad. Now I'm going to take my Orchid Flash and I'm just going to zigzag it over the top of my gold. You don't have to do it like this. You can run it on either side of the gold. You can have one line of gold and one line of pink. Just experiment with it and have fun with it. Now I'm going to take my parchment paper and I'm going to gently and lightly stick it to the paint, and then I am going to swipe up And then I'm going to reapply it and swipe down. You can also put your colored paints at the top. You can do it at the bottom. You can do it however you want. So I'm just going to continue to do that until I reach the end. I will use the painter spatula to fill in any spots where the matte is showing through the white paint. So you're just dragging it through very lightly, dragging it through your paint. And this method is used, artists use it on canvases. And it's really pretty. And with the Floetrol, you will get some cells. I didn't have a lot of room to work with, as you can see. My hand kept bumping into everything. So it's good to have a more open space where you have more room to work. So if you're happy at this point, then just let it dry. I wanted it to be just a little bit more blended, so I'm just going to run my parchment paper over it very lightly just to try and blend it in just a little bit more. I don't want to blend it too much because I don't want my gold or my pink disappearing. I am so sorry about the dog snoring. I know some people don't like the music that I put in my tutorials, but there is a reason for it, and it's to hide all the background noise. Right now, everyone else in the house is asleep. And my husband is a truck driver, so he's not here right now, but the dog. So I'm just trying to get it to where I like it. After seeing that first one, that first cup that I showed at the beginning, that probably took about 3 or 4 tries, and I didn't even like that one, but it was the best looking one out of all of them. So I wasn't happy with this one at this point, and I'm sure once some of y'all out there try this, that yours will come out looking even more amazing. But it does look different after you get it on your cup and you get it epoxied. The epoxy kind of takes the harshness away. It softens it up a bit, if that makes sense. So even though I didn't like how this was looking, the end result was, I was happy with it. So now I'm just going to let this dry for about 24 hours. And then we will be back to do the next step. So this has been drying for about 20 hours. It hasn't been quite 24 hours, but it was dry to the touch. So I'm taking that spatula, the Cricut spatula tool, and I am just running it around the edge of the skin to separate it from the mat. And it's sliding through it very easily. There's no resistance. If you feel any resistance at all, then that means that your paint isn't quite dry enough. So just let it sit for a little while longer and then come back and try it again. But it shouldn't take any longer than 24 hours. From what I've heard, it shouldn't take any longer than that to dry. So once you have it peeled up around the edges, just start gently pulling to separate it from the cutting mat. And it looks like I'm pulling pretty hard, but I'm not. It's coming up very easily. It's dry to the touch. And there you have your skin. So now I'm going to get ready for the next step. So as you can see, I have one edge there that I straightened. I just used a ruler and my X-Acto knife to straighten it out, and that's the part that I will be laying on the cup first. These skins, if you've never done one, I'm not the first one to do these. But you wrap them around your cup just like you would do with a fabric cup. So that straight edge is the part that I will be laying on my cup first. Or trying to. You'll see. So I'm just applying Mod Podge onto my cup. I'm not putting too thick of a layer, but it's not too thin either. It's just a nice even layer. I didn't base coat my cup. You can if you want. I normally do. And I should have done it with this one because I didn't have enough skin left over to cover the bottom of my cup. So I glittered the bottom of my cup and I didn't put any kind of a base color on it, and my white glitter came out just a little bit darker than I was wanting it to. It didn't look bad in the end, but I notice it. So just get your cup coated with your Mod Podge. And as I said before, this is a 20-ounce cup, and the skin was just enough to cover it. Just make sure that before you put it on, you figure out exactly where you're going to put it, or you're going to have an issue like I'm about to. So I had my cup too high up on the skin, or too high up, and there was a part of the cup where the skin wasn't covering. So I had to peel my skin off. I ended up tearing the skin a little bit, which was fine, but it was a little bit of a hassle, but it wasn't a big deal. But it could have been avoided. So just make sure before you put your cup down, that you figure out exactly where it needs to go so that it's covered on all areas. So I ended up not being able to use the straight edge that I cut. So just roll it onto your cup slowly, and as you're rolling it, smooth it out. You will have air bubbles, you will have wrinkles. This next part is always the part where I have trouble explaining excuse me, to people that have never done like a fabric cut before. So you have the edge that you started with already on the cup, and you have the end of the skin, you have the edge that you're left with. So at some point those two are going to overlap, and you're going to want to cut between those two edges so that you have a nice straight seam left on your cup. So you'll see what I'm getting ahead of myself, and I apologize. So you'll see the edge that's already Mod Podge to the cup, and then the end of the skin. And at some point those two overlap. So you need to find your edge that's underneath, and you'll be able to feel it. And that's why it's better to have a straight edge, to start with a straight edge. So find your edge that's underneath, and then you're going to want to cut between that and that edge. So I just take a ruler, but some people use washi tape or painter's tape to tape to their cup to get a straight edge. I use a ruler, and I'm going to cut through both layers of the acrylic skin. I'm going to peel off the excess on the top. And then I'm going to peel back the top layer. And it can be a little, just take your time with it because you've got Mod Podge on it and the Mod Podge dries quick. So just be careful and take your time. And then you're going to peel off the excess that's underneath. I hope all this makes sense. I always have trouble explaining this part. So once you have the excess underneath peeled off, apply some more Mod Podge to your cup. Okay, now you can apply more Mod Podge to your cup. As you can see, I'm going over that edge. And then I'm going to lay the other part. I'm going to fold it back over, and I have a straight seam where the two edges meet. If you leave the excess underneath, then you'll be able to see it. It'll leave a bulky it'll have a bulky look to it, and you'll be able to see the seam or the edge of the skin underneath. So then now you want to just go around, and if you have any air bubbles, you can try and push them up towards the top or the bottom of the cup to work them out. If you can't, then you can use your X-Acto knife to poke a hole in it and then press them down flat. This skin, once I had it on there, it was not perfect. It had wrinkles, but once I got the epoxy on there, you couldn't see them. I've discovered, and I told this to somebody the other day, people say that epoxy will reveal all the mistakes, but epoxy also covers a lot of mistakes too. So now I'm going to trim the excess off the top and the bottom. I'm using the cup as my guide. If you have enough leftover skin, which I did not, then you can use it to cover the bottom so that it looks like one continuous piece. And sometimes I will do that, and sometimes I will glitter the bottom. So just make sure your edges are pressed down. If you have a cup edging tool, then you can trim the top and the bottom of your cup with that. I don't have one. I've never used one, but I would suggest after we apply our Modpodge, let that dry and then use the cup edging tool. So just go around and check for any bubbles, things like that. You will be able to see under epoxy. You want to make sure that all your edges are pressed down and sealed. So that no epoxy can get underneath them. Since I don't have a cup edging tool around the top of the cup, I just make sure that I have plenty of Mod Podge around the top and that the skin is pressed down and sealed. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a layer of Mod Podge with fabric tumblers. You need 4 or 5 coats of Mod Podge so that the epoxy doesn't soak into the fabric. But with this one you only need 1 good coat. You just want to make sure that there's no that the epoxy is smooth. You don't have any clumps of epoxy anywhere. I mean Mod Podge. Make sure your seam is sealed really well. So as you can see, there's some imperfections, but all of that went away with the epoxy. So here I'm just showing you the cup from the beginning of the video, and there were some imperfections with this one before I applied the epoxy. There were some wrinkles in the skin, there were some bubbles, not air bubbles, but I think it was like little clumps in the paint or something, but you can barely see them now. You can't see any of those imperfections. So I'm sealing the bottom around the edge, and then once that's dry, then I will, and I don't do it in the video, but once this is dry, then I will put some more Mod Podge on the bottom of my cup, and I will cover it with glitter, and that one is Wilcox from Glitter Gang. I don't want to sprinkle it onto my cup now because the whole cup is covered with Mod Podge, and I only want it on the bottom of the cup. I don't want it anywhere else. So I'm going to let that dry, and then I will apply the glitter on the bottom. So now I will probably just let this, I think I let it sit for about 24 hours. I just let it sit overnight. And then it's time for epoxy. I believe this was 25 mLs of epoxy. And remember, so far this cup has no epoxy on it. This is the first layer. So this was 25 mLs of epoxy. I wanted a smooth surface. For my decal, and I didn't want to have to put on another coat. So now I will let this spin for 4 hours, and then I will move it to the drying rack, and I will let it sit overnight, anywhere from 12 to 24 hours. And then it will be time to put our decal on. I believe this vinyl that I'm using is a gold, foil adhesive vinyl, I believe is what it's called. It's a Cricut brand. The face, it's not the face that a lot of what you see on a lot of other cups. This one I made in Design Space. I'm going to be applying it along the seam to try and cover that as much as I can. I will put the name of this font in the description. So now I will let this sit for a few hours. I'm not going to seal or put a clear coat or anything over it. I'm just going to let it sit for a few hours. And then we will put our last and our next and hopefully last coat of epoxy. So actually I think the first coat of epoxy was 20 mLs and this one was 25. I wanted a little bit thicker because I don't like to feel the decal underneath the epoxy. So I made this coat a little bit more. So yes, the first one was 20 and this one is 25. So again, I will let it spin 4 hours and then sit on the drying rack. Sometimes when we use glitter, we get rough edges around the bottom. So all I'm showing you there is to just leave a little bit of epoxy left over, let it thicken up for 15-20 minutes, and then pour it around the edge of your cup, and that most of the time helps with the rough edges. So here is the final product. And I hope that this video inspired you a little bit to try it. And if you do try it, I would love to see it. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.